and it's very nice to be part of this session. I'm going to go, speaking of not being economical, I'm going to go slightly off-piste, and I'm actually going to bring in a lot of other studies as well as PISA, which I know has been the main focus so far. You will see why when I start talking about some of the trends in Ireland over recent years. So just to explain the data sources I'm going to be showing you, I think probably most people here will be somewhat familiar with PEARLS and TIMS. PEARLS is a study of reading at grade 4, so that's the G4 on the right hand side, there we go. TIMS is a study of mathematics and science at grade 4 at primary level and grade 8 at post-primary. So TIMS grade 8 can provide a counterpoint or a complementary source of data for PISA. NAMER is the one I imagine nobody here will have heard of before. It's a national assessment in Ireland. It takes place at 2nd grade and 6th grade in Ireland every 5 years or so. It's English reading and mathematics, normally at both grade levels, but because of COVID, the most recent cycle in 2021 did maths at 1 grade level and reading at 1 grade level only. But so between these, you can see there's quite a lot of data, trend data every 3, 4, 5 years, both at primary and post-primary levels across the range of reading, maths and science. So I'm just going to show you first some trends at primary level in Ireland. These are reading first, and I'll see how well you can see this. I mean, you don't need to see the figures there, but just to explain the way I've set up these graphs, essentially if you see a number in green font, it means there was a statistically significant increase in scores from one cycle to the next. Black font means there was no change, no statistical change, and red font means there was a significant decline between cycles. And we're looking here at trends from the kind of 1995 would be the TIMS 95 in that case, and otherwise from the early 2000s, and for some studies later in the 2000s up until last year. So at primary level, the data we have here really started 2009 with the national assessments. They were set to a new baseline of 250 at that point. There had been previous national assessments from the 1970s the whole way through that didn't show much change, but they were reset in 2009. But what I would draw your attention to here is for the national assessments, which are the kind of blue line and the pink line up here, there were significant increases in reading, both at 2nd grade and at 6th grade, around the early part of the 2010s. PEARLS, which Ireland joined in 2011 for the first time, also showed an increase between 2011 and 2016. And then, perhaps more surprisingly, PEARLS 2021 actually showed a significant increase in Ireland. Now, I would caveat that quite heavily by saying that because of COVID, PEARLS 2021 took place at the start of 5th grade in Ireland rather than the end of 4th grade, so it's not directly comparable in the way we would like with the 2016 score. But so the way we've been reporting this in our national reporting and trying to, I suppose, manage expectations and manage the interpretation of this is that you could say the reading scores in Ireland were at least stable over that period from the end of from the kind of mid-2010s to beyond COVID. The national assessment showed a similar stability between 2014 and 2021. So both of those studies took place during the midst of the COVID pandemic, and kind of a year into it, they both gathered data in 2021. So we see increases and then stability in reading. For mathematics, the trend line starts here in 1995 with TIMS, and we see no change up to 2011, and then a significant increase in TIMS in the mid-2010s. Again, the national assessments at 2nd and 6th. So here we have 2nd grade, 4th grade, and 6th grade all showing significant increases in mathematics, followed by stability from the mid-2010s up until 2019 for TIMS and 2021 for the national assessments. For science, TIMS is our only source. We don't have a national assessment of science in Ireland, and we do quite a lot of standardised testing of English reading and mathematics in primary schools. They happen at the end of most year in most primary schools, but for science, there's a lot less focus, and that might be something that comes up later. But from what we can see from TIMS, it's a very similar pattern. From 2011 to 2015, there was a significant increase in science at primary level, followed by an almost identical score in TIMS 2019. At post-primary level, This is the big one that got a lot of attention. So this is PISA, is the only post-primary large-scale assessment source that we have. You can see a fairly dramatic drop here, in particular in 2009. I believe of the countries that took part in PISA 2009, Ireland's was among the largest drops of any country, which was then followed by an even larger significant increase in 2012. And since then, there has been a sort of a slow reduction in scores, but none of which were statistically significant from cycle to cycle. One thing I would, I suppose, draw attention to here is if you disregard 2009, actually Ireland's scores across all of the cycles have kind of fallen within this band of sort of 515 points to 525. So there's a kind of a 10-point band where over the long view there's been real stability more or less in Ireland's performance apart from this one sort of outlier cycle. At mathematics, the top line here is TIMSS, which shows from 1995 to 2015 and then again to 2019, no significant changes. And the lower line is PISA, which again showed a significant decrease in mathematics in 2009, followed by a significant increase in 2012, the same way that we saw for reading, and then stable results until the most recent PISA cycle in 2022, where there was a significant decline in mathematics. And finally for science, the top line is TIMSS, which showed a significant increase from TIMSS 1995 to 2015. So there's a 20-year gap. It's obviously longer than we might want for trends, but also TIMSS is designed in such a way to facilitate trends even over that length of time. So a significant increase in the mid-2010s, followed by stable results to TIMSS 2019. For PISA, the results for science are slightly different than the pattern we see for reading and for maths. In 2009, there was no significant change in science, but there was a significant increase in 2012, followed by a decline in 2015, and then most recently, and perhaps surprisingly, a significant increase in science scores between 2018 and 2022. So over the COVID period, science results have actually gone up. And then as Joao showed, when you average the PISA scores from the three domains together, you come out with a sort of a net stability between 2018 and 2022. So just to summarize the trends, because the graphs, there's a lot going on, and I know the numbers can be hard to see and so on, but broadly speaking, at primary level, what we've seen is a real stable pattern of trends for reading, for maths, and for science. We saw significant increases in all three domains from the sort of 2010 or so up to the mid-2010s, and then stability from the middle of the last decade through to where we are now. PIRLS 21 suggests possibly some increase in reading scores, but as I say, we would be cautious about that, and the way we've been reporting that is that the reading results were stable, or at least stable, because of the difficulties of the comparison. At post-primary level, reading scores showed some ups and downs from 2000 to 2009, and then stability since 2012. And as I say, if you ignore the 2009 results, there's a general consistency within a sort of a 10-point band from 2000 the whole way through to 2022. In mathematics, TIMSS shows complete stability. PISA shows some mixed results, but a recent decline in the most recent cycle. And then for science, we see significant increases to the mid-2010s, and then mixed but broadly stable results. So there have been some increases about 10 years ago, kind of within the last 10, 15 years, mainly it's a picture of stability. So then just thinking of some policy developments that partly arose from these trends and may also help to inform the trends that have come since. So PISA 2009 is a very, very big one. As Gunda mentioned, a positive PISA shock. Ireland had the negative version of the PISA shock that I think a lot of other countries have had, which appeared to show, as you saw, a major drop in standards, particularly for reading and for mathematics. And it caused a lot of alarm among policymakers, the Ministry for Education, the media, in particular. It received an awful lot of focus. The extent of the decline, as I said, in Ireland was unusually large, both compared to previous trends in Ireland from PISA to 2000 to 2006 in particular, which was the main data source at the time, and also compared to other countries in the 2009 cycle. Following the 2009 results, colleagues of mine in Ireland did some secondary analysis, did a complete review of the sampling, other factors that might have done it, and did research. We also got external review done from psychometricians and sampling experts at Statistics Canada who came to Ireland, reviewed all the documentation and the procedures and the data and so on to see if they could explain why the decline had been so large. As I say, the Ministry of Education was quite alarmed about this and wanted to know what to do about it. So all of those investigations determined that there probably had been some real drop in standards, drop in PISA scores, but that the extent of the decline, something like 26 points in reading, which is quite large, had been exaggerated by, I think, what the Statistics Canada researchers called a perfect storm of confounding factors. So there had been some altered patterns of student engagement with the test compared to previous cycles, which essentially is, I mean, João mentioned the effort thermometer. So in the previous cycles of PISA, students had put in a certain amount of effort, and when you looked at the completion rate of the final blocks in the PISA test in 2009, you could see essentially that students just were giving up halfway through the test to a much greater degree in 2009 for whatever reason than had been the case in previous cycles. So you could have someone who was an excellent mathematician, but if they're not answering half the questions in the test because of a lack of effort or a lack of engagement, it's going to look like they're poor at mathematics. There were demographic changes in particular at that time, and there were also some statistical issues came up due to a very small number of linking items that were really responsible for establishing the link between PISA 2000 reading and PISA 2009, kind of about 20 items or so, and I think this probably affected some other countries, but in Ireland it was judged by the external reviewers that everything sort of happened to go in the same direction and probably exaggerated what had been a real decline to look particularly large. And you can see in 2012, when scores sort of rebounded to their previous level, the 2009 cycle now really looks like an outlier. Nonetheless, it had a very significant effect on policy in Ireland. So because of the results in 2009, it really drove a specific policy response focused on literacy and numeracy. There was a very large, very comprehensive, thorough national strategy for literacy and numeracy, which came out in 2011 and was set up to run for the next decade up to 2021. I won't get into all the various components of it at the moment, but it included some things like specific targets to try to increase the percentage of students reaching the higher proficiency levels, reducing the number of students at the lower proficiency levels in these kinds of assessments. It also increased instructional time in classrooms, both the primary and post-primary levels, for literacy and for numeracy. So teachers were expected to spend an extra hour a week on literacy-related instruction. There were changes to initial teacher education. Courses were lengthened from 3 years to 4 and from 1 year to 2, depending on whether it was postgraduate or undergraduate. And they also took on more focus on literacy and numeracy. Mandatory testing and reporting of standardized test results at 2nd, 4th and 6th grade through primary school was brought in. So a lot of schools had been doing testing before this, but it wasn't mandatory and it wasn't reported to the Department of Education. That came in, and school self-evaluation was brought in as a big thing. So schools were expected to come up with plans to improve the learning of students in their own schools and to set specific targets for learning, and again using standardized testing and other ways of judging this in a way and to a level of depth that hadn't been done before. And these school self-evaluation plans became part of things that when inspectors came to schools, they'd be expected to be able to show it and discuss it and show what they were doing to improve standards. There were also curricular changes. So again, I think Gunda mentioned maybe that in Estonia the curriculum tends to get renewed every 10 years or so. In Ireland, curriculum change happens much more slowly. I think when I was in primary school in the 1990s, the curriculum dated from 1971. And then a new curriculum was brought in 1999, which is only just now beginning to be replaced, kind of 25 odd years later. But part of that, and it's actually for some of the same reasons, there's a very consultative process in Ireland. So there is a curriculum agency that comes up, develops new specifications, which then go out for consultation, and teacher groups will have their say, parents will have their say, business groups, everyone can have a say, and then it goes through revision and it goes for consultation again, and the process takes several years. But as part of this new national strategy, there was a new curriculum for primary language, which in Ireland would be English, but also Irish language. We have some Irish medium schools. It was started being rolled out from the mid 2010s, 2015 through to 2019 on a gradual basis. There's a new primary mathematics curriculum, which was released just about 6 months ago at the end of last year. And about 5 years ago, a new lower secondary mathematics curriculum, so kind of junior cycle, lower secondary was brought in. There's also been a very long-standing policy focus in Ireland on student achievement in what are called designated disadvantaged schools. So these are schools that serve a large proportion of students from more disadvantaged backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds and educational disadvantage. That was already a focus. There was a large program, DESH is the name of it. So this, in the Irish language, DESH means a chance or an opportunity. And the idea is that you're giving these students more of a chance. The English acronym is delivering equality of opportunity in schools. So that program was set up in 2005, so it predated the PISA shock, but more resources, more focus, more emphasis was given to it, and targets specifically for DESH schools, which are about 2/5 of schools in Ireland. They receive extra supports and interventions and so on. Specific targets for those schools were set in a review of the strategy in 2017. One big issue here, and it's something we might discuss, and I have a little asterisk because I'll come back to this in the next slide, is it's very, very hard, it has proven to be very hard to specifically evaluate the causal effects of a program like DESH, despite the fact that it has now been in place for about 20 years. It receives huge resources. There's a lot of different parts to it, and it's a very complex program. And I think the evidence would show that, certainly from things like PISA, but also TIMSS and PIRLS, where we have international comparisons, Ireland, the lower achieving students in Ireland, the students at the lower end of the distribution and the most disadvantaged students, actually do quite well in Ireland compared to other countries with similar average levels of achievement. So it does look like DESH and programs like it have been quite successful in some ways in supporting the lower achieving students. But we also see from these assessments that higher achieving students in Ireland aren't performing at the same levels as the high performers in other countries, comparable to Ireland, and we have much fewer students at the higher proficiency benchmarks than you would expect based on Ireland's average level of achievement. So, which brings us to the current day. So there's a new numeracy digital literacy strategy coming out, and actually it is being launched, I believe, on Wednesday this week. So I was invited to the launch, but I'm missing it because I'm here, so I think I got the better end of the deal. It's coming out this week, so we don't fully know what is going to be in the final version, but you can see compared to the last strategy, there's already a new focus on digital literacy. And I think based on the findings of studies like PISA, TIMSS, PIRLS, and national assessments in particular, there's likely to be more focus on higher achieving students in Ireland, as I just mentioned. There's specific areas of concern, such as shape and space and geometry and mathematics, which we see from PISA and TIMSS, tends to be a weakness in Ireland. Attitudes and gender differences in attitudes towards reading and mathematics and science are likely to be a focus, and other areas such as family support for learning, which have been touched on in other areas. But so you can see why I mentioned at the start how I was going to be throwing in a lot more data, a lot more studies than just PISA, and this is part of the reason why I think one of the lessons from, I suppose, Ireland as a case study, or one of the lessons that we have come to, is the PISA 2009 results had this huge effect on the system directly through the literacy and numeracy strategy. And we did see since then, so in the 4 or 5 years after the strategy came in, significant increases in reading, maths and science at primary level, and increases in PISA 2012, although that would have been too soon to really be attributable in any way to the strategy. But increases again through the mid-2010s at post-primary level, and then stability since then. So in some respects, you could say there's suggestions that this national strategy had some positive impacts in the first few years that then leveled off, and there's questions then about, well, was there low-hanging fruit that was picked in the first few years to increase scores, and then it was harder to increase them further? Is it somewhat coincidental in some ways, or were there some aspects of it that worked, and then it was just harder and harder to keep making progress? But as João mentioned, the evidence that we have so far from the period over COVID, from PISA, but also from the national assessments and from PEARLS, all point to the direction that there's no clear evidence of any particular learning loss, or certainly not at an overall level in Ireland, which I think was unexpected for us, and certainly reassuring compared to a lot of other countries. So I think this is my last slide, and this is just coming back to the asterisk about evaluating debt, and I suppose related to the topic of the session here today, and trying to evaluate the impacts of educational policies and interventions, and how do we know what's working, and how can we find the causal effects of things. Myself and a colleague, Lorraine Galeese, have actually just in the last month published a paper in a journal called Irish Educational Studies, which is open access. And one reason we were very keen to make it open access is we're really trying to start a conversation, particularly in Ireland, of course in the journal that it's in, but also elsewhere, about the evaluation of educational policies and how strongly we can draw firm inferences, firm conclusions about when a policy or an initiative or curriculum change is brought in. How strongly can we say that any subsequent effects were caused by it, or linked to it, or associated with it, or it rather than one thing else in particular, or maybe it works for some people in some contexts but less well for others, and so on, how we disentangle that. And DESH is the particular focus of this paper, and also a programme called Read and Recovery, which is in a lot of Irish schools and also in other English-speaking countries. It's very common in New Zealand and the US and Australia and UK and so on. There have been real challenges to evaluating DESH over the last 20 years, and also Read and Recovery. There's been very little in Ireland. Some of it is to do with conceptual clarity. So for example, in DESH schools, are they trying to support students in schools where there's a really high concentration of disadvantaged students, or should it be trying to support disadvantaged students even if they're in a different school context? So is it aimed at student level or school level and so on? There's data limitations to do with the lack of joined up data sets and so on, variations in supports and then at the time that the different schools have been in programs and so on. And all of these things make it very, very difficult to disentangle and identify causal effects of policies, and it's a very, very messy landscape. But so we've put this out to try and set this going a bit in Ireland, and I think it's great to see conversations like this happening in Portugal and elsewhere, I think on a similar theme. And that's it from me, so I'll say obrigado.